This video is designed to explain the good math content I found on YouTube. So first of all, this video begins with an important tip, which is writing the problem the correct way whenever multiplying with decimals. So it is important the instructor writes the problem horizontally so students can see how to take a decimal multiplication problem written this way, and then he models it very well and writes it vertically. While the instructor is writing it vertically, it is also important and very good that he is telling students to line up the numbers instead of the decimal points, because many students get confused with that since this is how they add and subtract decimals. It is also very good in the way the instructor is writing the second factor and that he is writing it from left to right versus from right to left, because that is the way students will be sure they are lining up the problem correctly. The instructor also does a nice job of telling the students that if they are using a notebook piece of paper to turn it sideways to have so they can have nice even columns. And this is an important tip for students because many times they have a problem with getting the numbers jumbled up and not organized very well. But whenever a notebook piece of paper is turned sideways, they have nice even columns and they are able to multiply, divide, do anything with very large numbers nice and organized. So that's an important tip that he gives them throughout the video. Overall, I think the modeling is excellent as far as the instructor doing a very nice job of modeling and thinking aloud through every single step, showing students the importance of breaking down the multiplication problem as a step-by-step process as opposed to looking at the whole entire problem all at once. But he does a very nice job of breaking every single step down. As far as breaking the steps down, the instructor does a very nice job of crossing out numbers that have already been multiplied. And this is important because it signifies to students that once they have multiplied that number by the top factor, they are finished with it. So once again, it's breaking the steps down for students so they are not confused on numbers that don't need to be there anymore. The instructor does an excellent job of providing tips that students are able to take away after they leave this video, so they're not relying on an instructional video every single time they go to multiply two decimals by each other. And I always take the philosophy that it's important as an instructor or as a teacher that we are teaching students how to fish. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you feed him for life. So I think it's really important that as a teacher, we provide our students tips that allow them to fish with math versus just feeding them for a day. And not only does the instructor just provide them key tips on how to remember certain problems or certain steps within this multiplication problem, but the instructor really focuses in on the key areas where students usually always mess up when multiplying decimals and 3-digit by 2-digit numbers or 4-digit by 3-digit numbers or whatever within multiplication. So the first tip the instructor provides that the students will be able to take away with them after the video is the happy placeholder, which is extremely important tip because when students multiply by larger numbers, they usually always make a mistake if they're going to make one by forgetting to add zeros within the partial product. The instructor also provides a scoop tip on where to put the decimal in the answer. Now, it is important students leave with this tip on where to put the decimal in the answer because this is just another area where if students are going to make a mistake, they will probably either make it on where they're putting the decimal or where they're adding the zeros within the partial product. So by providing these two tips and just a fun way to remember these tips is very, very important when trying to teach students how to fish in math. I also think the instructor did a very nice job of ignoring the decimal point until the end of the problem. Many times whenever students see a decimal point, I feel as though their IQ drops at least 50 points because they get nervous, they get worried by it, they're scared by the decimal point. But since the instructor ignores it until the very end, this shows the students that there's really nothing to worry about. And you go through the multiplication problem, 2 times 3 still equals 6, whether there's a decimal point in the problem or not. I also think the instructor does a very nice job of modeling on how to say the answer and that he is saying it correctly, such as 4 and 224 hundredths versus saying 2.224. I think this is important to model for students because I always tell my students that when they are in math class, they are mathematicians and they're mathematical experts and they talk like one versus everyday common number language. So the fact that he is modeling correctly how to say these numbers I think is very important. I also like how the instructor talks about his answer making sense, and many times when students are working with decimals their answers do not make sense, but by modeling his answer and providing a way to make sure it makes sense, that's just another skill that is important for students to develop when multiplying decimals. And I also even like that he gives an example of a possible incorrect answer and discusses on why that answer would not make any sense. Another part of this video that I like is that the instructor also makes it a point to put the number with more digits on top of the multiplication problem, and he points that out to students. This can just be another area where students could get mixed up on, especially when they put the smaller number on top, and whenever students put the smaller number on top, I always see them get messed up and usually come out with an incorrect answer. Another part of the video that I think the instructor does a very nice job with is just the fact that he's using humor and he's very engaging for students. Even the key tips that he provides, such as the happy placeholder, is just something that goes a really long way, especially with young people and trying to foster that love for math. I also like within this video how the instructor, for each different number being multiplied, he is using different ink, which allows students to see the different steps in this multiplication problem. I also like when the instructor is going over his second problem that he asks the students to pause the video to see if their placement of the decimal is going to be correct. Now I think this is important because it makes students become active learners, which is different from so many other videos where students are just spectators and are not involved with the instructional video. And the final thing that I like about this video is that the instructor goes over the place value on the second problem, which is important because many students would think that the number would be 68 and 607 thousandths as opposed to 68 and 607 10,000ths, because many students forget that decimals start at the tenths place, and I always tell my students that there is no such thing as a ones place. So these are all the different reasons why I think that this instructional video would be considered a quality math video found on YouTube.